Hello, and a very warm welcome to this webinar this afternoon on applying to core training in psychiatry. I'm Kate Lovett. I'm the Presidential Lead for Recruitment at the Royal College of Psychiatrists and a consultant psychiatrist in Devon. I have the best job in the world, and I'm absolutely delighted this afternoon that over 400 of you are joining us to think about the practicalities and operational aspects of applying to core training in psychiatry. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our very first speaker, who is Amelia O'Donnell. And Amelia is the National Recruitment Coordinator at Health Education Northwest, which lead national recruitment for psychiatry. So Amelia, over to you.
Hi everyone. If I can ask for the slides to be put onto the screen. Perfect. So I'm going to talk to you about applying for the Core Psychiatry Training Programme for August 2022, which also incorporates ST1 Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Training, which is a run-through pilot. So next slide, please. So I'll be giving an overview of the process, including what kind of posts are involved, the eligibility requirements, some things you'll need to bear in mind when completing the application form, and I'll also cover some information on the multi-specialty recruitment assessment, the preferences process and offers, and then I'll finish with some key dates for you. So if I can have the next slide, please. So first of all, as you may be aware, the recruitment process for core psychiatry changed in response to the pandemic. The process was agreed for the August 2021 intake, and it allowed us to successfully complete recruitment to core psychiatry training despite all the difficult circumstances. We expect to use the same recruitment process for the August 22 intake and also for the February 23 intake. So to be clear, there won't be any face-to-face or online interviews for this core psychiatry round of recruitment. Additionally, there's no requirement for applicants to provide any portfolio evidence to support their application. Applicants will be ranked using their MSRA results only. The MSRA is a computer-based test, and that has been proven to be a reliable, valid, and standardized way of assessing a large number of candidates, and it does so using limited clinician administrative resources. It's also globally accessible, and it can be delivered remotely and in person. The MSRA has been part of the core psychiatry recruitment process in various ways over the last 7 years. Initially, it was introduced as a pilot, then as an element of the final selection score, and then finally as the only method for ranking candidates. So given this experience, we know that the MSRA is a strong indicator of future satisfactory performance. And there's also a strong correlation between the MSRA and how applicants have previously scored when we did run face-to-face interviews. Can I have the next slide, please? So in terms of what you need to do as an applicant, you'll need to register and apply for core psychiatry on the Oriel system. It's possible that we will contact you with queries about your application, so you may need to clarify some points during the long listing period. You'll need to arrange your MSRA to time and location that's convenient to you. You'll need to complete your preferences and indicate which posts you wish to be considered for, and then hopefully you'll need to respond to an offer. We can have the next slide, please. So for this round of recruitment, applicants will submit a single application to core psychiatry, and they will be considered for around 405 vacancies. So this chart shows the anticipated vacancy numbers and is probably an underestimate at this time. So you'll see we're recruiting for England, Scotland and Wales for the August 22 intake. Northern Ireland will be running their own local recruitment process for this intake. In England, there are both core psychiatry options and the child and adolescent psychiatry run-through options. So if you chose a child and adolescent psychiatry run-through option, you wouldn't need to reapply at ST4 level. You would just run through to CCT. And as you can see, in Scotland and Wales, there are only CT1 core psychiatry posts available. So these indicative vacancy numbers are available on our website, and they're broken down further by region, and they are likely to change throughout the process. So later down the line, when you come to preference your posts, the numbers will be more accurate and there'll be further details about each post as well. If I can have the next slide, please. So you can find the eligibility requirements in the CT1 Core Psychiatry person specification, and it's also available in the applicant's guide on our website. So to summarize, applicants must have a primary medical qualification. They must be eligible for full GMC registration with a license to practice at the time of the post start date, which is August 22. So if you're currently working overseas, for example, and have given up your license to practice, you'll have the opportunity to explain that in the application form, and it would then be your responsibility to ensure that the license to practice is reactivated by your post start date. Applicants must have 24 months clinical experience, so that's the equivalent to the UK Foundation Training Programme. And of that experience, 12 months needs to be at a post full GMC registration level or equivalent. Applicants must be eligible to work in the UK. And currently, as you may know, all medical practitioner jobs are on the shortage occupation list, so we don't anticipate that being an issue. You'll need to provide evidence of your English language skills and evidence of your foundation competency. And as it says, there's no limit to the amount of previous psychiatry experience you can have. So if you have a few years of experience, that isn't a barrier to applying. If I can have the next slide, please. So moving on, you'll need to apply via the Oriel system, and I've included a link. You will submit a single application to be considered for all core psychiatry posts in England, Scotland and Wales, and then also the ST1 child and adolescent psychiatry run-through posts in England. The application window opened this morning and will close at 4 p.m. UK time on Wednesday, 1st of December 2021. So do make sure that you give yourself enough time to complete the application, bearing in mind that we don't accept late or incomplete applications. We have an applicant's guide on our website, which contains everything you will need to know about this round of recruitment. I can have the next slide, please. So the application form is fairly straightforward and very factual. So you'll be asked for your personal information, like your name and your address, the details of your primary and medical qualification. You will also need to provide your employment history to date and details of 3 referees. There are no white space box questions in the application form, so you won't need to prepare any responses explaining your interest in psychiatry, for example. And depending on your circumstances, you may need to provide further evidence to support your application, but the form will prompt you to attach that. So once you've submitted your application, it will be longlisted and reviewed to make sure that you meet the entry criteria. So between submitting your application and Christmas, you may be contacted to provide additional evidence or an explanation. And your response will be needed by a given deadline, so we really would recommend regularly checking your Oriel account for any updates. At the end of the longlisting process, everyone who's been successfully longlisted will receive a message to confirm that they will progress to the next stage. If I can have the next slide, please. So there are some circumstances where you may need to provide some further information, and so we've highlighted some of the key ones here. So if you need any kind of adjustment to the MSRA, you'll need to provide some supporting evidence. So for example, if you have dyslexia, you could provide an educational psychologist report that has a recommendation for additional time in exams. Secondly, if you're the primary care of someone who's disabled, or if you have a medical condition or a disability yourself, and if that requires ongoing follow-up in a specific location, you can apply for the special circumstances process. You'll need to submit a form and supporting evidence to the central team by the application closing date. And if that's approved, then later on, you would be allocated ahead of other applicants as you've demonstrated that you must remain in a specific geographical area. Can I have the next slide, please? So if you have previously started a core psychiatry training post and you've since been released or you've resigned from the programme, you'll need to provide a reapplication to specialty form, which is signed by your previous region. Next, if you've answered yes to any of the fitness to practice questions, then there's a declaration form that you'll need to complete to provide us with further details. And we collect that information to pass on to your eventual employer. but in most instances, it won't affect your eligibility. And then finally, foundation competence evidence. So if you're not currently in a UK affiliated Foundation Year 2 post, then you will need to attach evidence of your recent completion of foundation training, so an FPCC, or you need to show that you have equivalent competence. Have the next slide, please. So if you are currently in a UK foundation programme, you need to provide the name of your foundation school in your application. Similarly, if you're in a core training or specialty training programme of any specialty, then you need to provide your DRN or NTN in the application form, and you would be exempt from providing any further evidence. If you've completed foundation training in the last 3.5 years, so since the 1st of January 2019, then you should have an FPCC, a Foundation Certificate of Completion, and the form should prompt you to upload this. But if you've completed your foundation program more than 3.5 years ago and you don't fall into the categories listed on the screen, then you will need to provide a CREST. Have the next slide, please. So the CREST, the Certificate of Readiness to Enter Specialty Training, the certificate maps to the foundation curriculum, and it must be signed off by someone who's supervised you for a continuous period of at least 3 months since 1st of January 2019. And the CREST can relate to a post held in the UK or overseas. Please do make sure that you're using the 2021 version of the CREST. And like it says, submit one fully completed certificate. We can't accept multiple versions. And please make sure that you read the guidance on the specialty training website. And there's a link below as well. Next slide, please. So now I'll just go through some of the information that we collect from your application form. These elements aren't really considered as part of the recruitment process, so they won't affect your chances of receiving an offer. But if you are successful, then they will be passed on to your new employer. So for example, if you want to defer your start date for statutory reasons, e.g. like parental leave or ill health, you'll indicate that on the application form, and that will be visible to your recruiting region. Similarly, if you wish to train less than full time, you would request this on the application form, and that would be forwarded on to your local region, and they'll discuss the practicalities of that with you. Some of you may have experience in another specialty that you might want to put towards your core psychiatry training, so as to shorten the training period. So you can indicate an interest in the accreditation of transferable competencies framework in the application form. That would be forwarded onto your new region, and they would decide to approve it. And finally, some of you will need to take up a skilled worker visa in order to accept your post. So you'll indicate that in your application form, and the central sponsors for England, Scotland and Wales will be in touch, and they'll discuss the next steps for you after you have accepted a post. If I can have the next slide, please. So moving on to the multi-specialty recruitment assessment. The MSRA is a computer-based test and is the only element that we will use to rank applicants for the August 22 intake. The test is used by a number of CT1 and ST1 specialties, so you'll only sit it once and it will count for them all. There are 2 papers, and we will use the combined score of both of them to create your final interview score and ranking. So the MSRA is made up of 2 papers. The first is Professional Dilemmas, and that focuses on your approach to practicing medicine. And the second is a clinical problem-solving paper. That's not a test of knowledge, but rather your ability to apply it appropriately. If I can have the next slide, please. So this slide covers the practical side of the MSRA. So as long as you're eligible and are longlisted, you will be invited to sit the MSRA. So if you've sat the MSRA previously in September 21 or earlier, you will need to resit the test. So for this round of recruitment, the MSRA will take place between Thursday the 6th of January and Saturday the 15th of January. And that's at Pearson VUE centres, which are available in the UK and globally. Given the ongoing pandemic, there are arrangements that can be put into place for people who are unable to attend testing centres due to isolation or local lockdown measures or travel restrictions, for example. And in those circumstances, it'll be possible to complete the test online at home, but in the first instance, you will be invited to a test centre. In the event of significant disruptions to testing due to COVID-19, the MSRA will be delivered remotely to all applicants. And then information on how to prepare for the MSRA, including example questions, can be found on our website. And there's a link there. Can I have the next slide, please? So as discussed earlier, anticipated vacancy numbers have been published on our website, and it's likely that there will be changes between now and the time of offers. So when you come to preference the post, you'll have a clearer idea of how many posts are available, and there'll be a fuller description of each post. Applicants will need to achieve the minimum raw score on each MSRA paper to be eligible for a post offer. And to reiterate, there'll be no interviews for this round of recruitment. Posts are just offered according to MSRA scores only. We expect to make initial offers from Monday the 7th of March 2022, and as standard, you'll have 48 hours to respond. So initially, you'll be able to accept, hold, or decline your offer, and the hold offer is there for applicants who are possibly applying for multiple specialties and they're waiting for an offer from another specialty in the same round of recruitment. And the hold deadline is 1 p.m. on Tuesday, the 5th of April. We make our offers in cycles, roughly every 48 hours until there's no further movement, no further offers to be made. If I can have the next slide, please. Thank you. So here are some of the key dates for this round of recruitment, and this information is available on our website. It's really crucial that you submit your application by 4 p.m. on Wednesday, the 1st of December, as we don't accept late or incomplete applications. The longlisting window will take place between the application opening date, which is today, and it will be wrapped up by mid-December. So it's quite a large window, and it's important that you regularly check your account throughout the window for updates, because a lot of them will be time sensitive. If I can have the next slide, please. So there will be an opportunity to ask questions towards the end of the webinar, but we do have our own email address, so please feel free to contact us at any time throughout the recruitment process. Hopefully you found that useful, so thank you very much for listening.
Great. Well, thanks, Amelia. And that's a really comprehensive description of the process of applying to CT1. And I'm going to move us on in a second to Rosemary Gordon. But before I do, could I just remind people, if they've got questions that they want the panel to answer at the end of the webinar, could you please put those in the Q&A box, and we will be collating those as we go through. You can also upvote the questions. So if somebody else is asking a question that you're really keen to see asked, please upvote it and it will come to the top of the list. So put them in the Q&A box, not in the chat, please. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Rosemary Gordon. Rosemary trained initially as a GP. She's a fully qualified GP, but then saw the light and went on to train as a psychiatrist. She's currently a higher trainee in the southeast of Scotland and is an ST4 in adult psychiatry. She's our current chair of the Psychiatric Trainees Committee at the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and she's going to talk to us about training and the PTC. So Rosemary, over to you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Lovett. So as Dr. Lovett has said, I am the chair of the Psychiatric Trainees Committee, and I'm going to give you a very whistle-stop tour, I'm hoping in the next kind of 10 minutes, talking about core training, the Psychiatric Trainees Committee, and what we can do to work with you to improve training. Next slide, please. So first of all, I'm so glad that you're all here. That means that you're all thinking about choosing psychiatry, and I hope by the end of today that you'll be sure that this is what you want to do. Next slide. So how would you become a psychiatrist? So the training pathways split into core training and higher training Although, as we've already discussed, there are some opportunities to do run-through training in child and adolescent psychiatry in England. And we also hope that we'll have a pilot scheme for intellectual disability, which will be run through this year as well. Most training programmes have 3 years as a core trainee, in which you do different specialities within psychiatry. And that includes, if you do run through CAMS training, you will still get experience in other specialities. And then you do at least 3 years as a higher trainee specialising in one aspect of psychiatry. Next slide, please. So what are the aims of core training? Core training is a fantastic opportunity to learn about psychiatry and become confident in diagnosis, formulation and management of mental health issues, but also the holistic care of physical health problems that many of our patients have. Psychiatry really is the epitome of the biopsychosocial model of healthcare, and as well as learning about pharmacology treatments, you will develop your skills in psychotherapy. As medics, we're always thinking about the next exam. Psychiatry currently has 3 exams, 2 written papers and an OSCE style exam, which need to be completed by the end of CT3. Most importantly, psychiatry is a great speciality and you should enjoy your core training and it should be fun. Next slide, please. So what does core training actually look like? Everybody who undertakes core training has certain jobs that they need to do within the core training. Everybody will do a year of general adult psychiatry, which is either mixed inpatient, outpatient, or kind of split into 6-month posts. Everybody will do an old age psychiatry job and a developmental psychiatry job. So the developmental psychiatry job will either be in child and adolescent psychiatry or in intellectual disability. The other year of training can be made up of different jobs depending on what's available, where you work and what you want to do. So for instance, in my CT3, I did a 6-month inpatient forensic job in a medium secure unit and then 6 months in a split inpatient outpatient addictions job. Next slide, please. So opportunities in core training. So I've already talked about kind of pharmacology and holistic care. Psychiatry is amazing that you get to do physical medicine and psychological medicine. So you get a chance to do psychotherapy and you'll be part of a Balint group. You'll get to do a short case, which is often something like cognitive behavioural therapy, then a long case, which again, something like psychodynamic psychotherapy. You'll be trained in ECT, both to learn about indications, but also to prescribe and to give ECT. There's lots of other skills you can learn throughout core training. Leadership and management, I became part of the PTC. There's lots of opportunities to do teaching and to do quality improvement and audit. There is so much learning going on in psychiatry at the moment, and you really get to be at the centre of what is going to be a fantastic opportunity and speciality going forward. Next slide, please. So why do I love psychiatry? Every patient and every day is different. I never quite know what I'm going into. You get weekly supervision, something that you don't get in other specialities. I sit down with my consultant once a week for an hour and we talk about things like the PTC, like how I'm going to improve my audit skills and things that I found difficult, interactions that I found difficult. You get to work in an MDT. We have psychologists, we have occupational therapists, physios, nursing staff, support workers, and peer support workers, and obviously our amazing admin staff. It's a fantastic opportunity to work in an MDT. As I've already said, there's psychological and psychotherapy elements, and there's a real interplay between physical and mental health, and there isn't one without the other. And as I've said, there's lots of non-clinical opportunities. Next slide, please. So now's my very quick summary of the Psychiatric Trainees Committee. Next slide. So who are the PTC and what do we do? So we're a group of trainees who are elected from across the country, and that is the 4 nations. As well as approximately 39 trainee representatives from across the country, we also have a military trainee rep, a foundation trainee rep, a medical student rep, an international medical graduate rep, an examination subcommittee rep, and the editor of our PTC magazine, The Registrar. Each division or devolved nation has 3 representatives, apart from London and Scotland, who both have 6, due to the numbers of trainees in these areas. So what do we do? Well, we're here to represent trainees both within the college and at external committees, such as the Medical Royal Colleges and the BMA. We want to drive improvement in psychiatry training and encourage recruitment and retention within psychiatry and to support trainees through the training. So where do we sit in the college? So I love this question because it's a really easy answer. We sit everywhere. So we have a trainee representative on every committee in college, which includes council, special interest groups, faculty committees, college divisions, and devolved nations. Next slide, please. So I wouldn't be doing my job as PTC chair if I didn't totally talk about the PTC and our priorities at every opportunity I had. Trainees really are the future of the college, and my vision is at the heart of all the work the college does. This is a really big year for training, and there'll be a new curriculum coming out in August 2022, and lots of portfolio changes associated with this. We want both the curriculum and the portfolio to be useful tools for trainees learning, and we hope that you find these changes helpful, and please feel free to get in touch with any comments or suggestions. Engagement with trainees is our priority, and in the last year we've had national CT and ST welcome events, trainee focused webinars, and our trainee conference. We want to continue this national engagement, but also focus on local engagement. I want every trainee to not only know about the PTC, but to know who the local rep is, to know how to get in touch. I always feel really privileged that as a PTC, the college genuinely appreciate trainee input and that we can really be a vessel for improvement. And finally, we're aiming for a further conference later this year, and I hope many of you can attend. Next slide. So I've talked a lot about how we do things, but what has the PTC done and how does this affect trainees? Next slide. Fundamentally, the PTC is about improving training, and we're involved in the conversations about training, exams, recruitment. We're involved in lots of conversations about recruitment, and we get involved in these talks, which is fantastic. We sit on the Education and Training Committee, and we're able to discuss any training issues that come up. I meet monthly with the Dean of the College, and we're involved in standardising ARCPs across the country and have been updating the COVID ARCP guidance. We also sit on the Portfolio Committee, and we look at all the changes to make the portfolio as useful as we can. Next slide. We're involved in organising trainees conferences and events. We had our second national trainee conference in March and hope that our next one will be in May 2022. During International Congress, we have a trainees lounge with time to network and lunchtime trainees sessions. In non-COVID times, we also had fantastic social nights, and I hope this is something we can get back to soon. Next slide. We love getting feedback from trainees, but we also want trainees to know what we are doing. So we have regular publications, including the Registrar magazine, which is our trainees magazine, bi-monthly newsletters, which if you only open one email once you're a trainee, please read the PTC newsletter. It's full of really interesting and helpful information. And Future Psych, which is our Medical Student Foundation trainee magazine. Next slide. We have produced a number of trainee-specific publications over the last couple of years, and that includes things like the cost of training document, showing where the money from the exams that you pay for goes to, the Parenthood leaflets, psychotherapy survey, training and trainees QI guide, and wellbeing podcasts, which again, if you've not read, even though you're not in psychiatry training yet, I think the wellbeing podcasts are great for anybody and any medic. The Staying Well leaflets and our supported and valued documents. Next slide. Other than seeing patients, being on the PTC is the favourite part of my job, and I would encourage you to look for opportunities to join the PTC in training. But you don't need to be a PTC rep to help improve training. We can only make changes if we hear from you. So please get to know your local reps and feedback to us and keep up to the date with the work we're doing through the newsletter. And as always, next slide. I'm always happy for people to get in touch with us. So you can either email ptcsupport@rcpsych.ac.uk, or I'm happy for people to contact me directly, either from Twitter or my email.
Great, thanks, Rosemary. And I hope that you will have seen from Rosemary's talk just how important trainees are to the Royal College of Psychiatrists. They really are at the heart of our college, and as a CT1 you can hit the ground running and become involved in some incredible adventures and influencing policy on a national level. So thanks for that really vibrant talk, Rosemary, and I hope that people will have picked up your energy and enthusiasm from that. But let's not take your word for it. You're an ST4 now, and many of us on the panel are very far removed from training and the application process. So I'm delighted that we've got Divya Thevan, who is a CT1 psychiatrist in London, and Divya is going to talk to us about her experience of entering CT1 training and what it was like. So Divya, really excited to hear your talk. Over to you.
Hi everybody. I do apologize. This is my first online presentation, so if there's any technical difficulties, please bear with me. So I'm just going to try and share my screen. If this works. It's just giving it away now. Oh no. Okay, so hopefully, sorry, that's on my first slide now. So yes, my name is Divya. I'm a CT1 in Southwest London and St. George's. I started in August, so I am very new to the whole process, but I'm hoping today, the aim of my talk is to hopefully make everyone aware what CT1 has been like and what the application process has been as well. So the first thing I wanted to do was actually kind of understand who was in the audience, because I get that it's quite difficult when this is not face-to-face. So if, Katie, if you could put the poll question up. So I just wanted to kind of understand who's around. I actually went to this webinar myself last year when I was in a locum, so I was in F4 last year, and I found it really useful. So I am hoping it's just as useful to everyone here. And if you're someone who is putting down as other, it'll be interesting to see what your other is at the moment, if you would like to say that in the chat. Let me see if I... Okay, so we got a nice mix. Yeah, lots of F1s, F2s, which is good. And some others as well in F3. Okay, fine. Okay, so that's really interesting to see where everyone's coming from. So thank you so much. And yeah, I do really hope that my slides are relevant to you guys today. So the first thing I was going to move on to is essentially what psych has been like and why I want to do psychiatry. So some very similar things to what Rosemary said in her presentation. My journey started when I was at medical school. I really enjoyed my placement. I was very lucky enough to go to King's College London, and there was a big Institute of Psychiatry there and their involvement. And then, so when I was ranking my F1, F2 jobs, I made sure that I wanted to do, have a placement that had a job in psychiatry. And so I went to St. George's as F1, and I did liaison psychiatry there. And I had a really great team, really great consultants, very welcoming. They, were willing for me to be part of the management plan, even though I was so junior, and made me feel, like as I've said, very welcome. And I think the thing about doing psych as a real job compared to when you're a medical student is that you do see lots of things that you don't tend to read about or hear about. So I remember one particular case that really inspired me was a catatonic patient. He was a gentleman that was completely mute, couldn't walk, wasn't eating, drinking, had needed ITU support, and just seeing how my team managed him. And then within a few weeks, he literally was up and about, functioning, just going back to his normal day-to-day activities. And so for me, that made me feel like, yes, this is the kind of thing that I want to do for the rest of my working career. So I would say that's something I would recommend to anybody who's thinking about applying for psychiatry, that it is useful to get hands-on real life experience to really see whether this is right for you. Some of the things that I can pick up while being on psych is that you do have a lot more time for your patients compared to the other specialties. And I think there's a real art in terms of listening to your patient and really understanding what their backgrounds are, where they come from, and really getting down to what makes a person tick. And I think that is what's really unique about psychiatry. And I think the nice thing about it is, for me, I know it makes me self-reflect on myself, my qualities, my relationships with the people around me. And so I think if you are someone who's interested in psychology and sociology and that kind of aspect, then core training is for you. Looking forward to the future, I know I'm interested in older adult psychiatry. I'm not saying that as a CT1 you need to have that figured out, because that's what your core training is all about, is about doing different jobs and seeing what variability is out there. But for me, I know I want to go into older adults, because when I was in F2, I did a geriatrics job, and I just remember feeling so rewarded working with that particular patient group, and just feeling, you know, I can really get on board with a holistic approach to their patient care. And I think the good thing about older age psychiatry as well, that it has a lot of overlap with neurology. And so I have a particular interest in that. So yeah, so I thought that was a good balance of the two. So that's probably another thing to pick up on as well, that even your other jobs in medicine and surgery can still influence what route you want to go down in psychiatry, because there is a lot of overlap in the other subspecialties. So I think Amelia went through a lot of what the application process is like. So I wanted to kind of touch on the tips that I found useful when applying for psychiatry, particularly about the MSRA. So for anybody who's planning to do the exam in January, my advice is definitely start the revision now. It's not something you can leave to the last minute. Obviously, start slow and build up as time goes on. The question bank I mainly used was past medicine. I would say try and get through that question bank twice. I know there's a lot of questions, but firstly break it down into topics, because for me, I remember there were things like dermatology and ENT that I was very rusty on, and I needed some time to go through that knowledge all over again. And then the second time around, when you do the question bank, just do all the questions on a random shuffle to see how much you remember to retain. Other question banks that you may or you may not need to want to invest in, and that is your personal choice, but there is one called MCQ Bank. And I remember when you're going through those questions, some of the questions highlights that those are questions that are actually reflected in the actual exam. But from my experience, I think at the very most, there might have been just 2 or 3, so it wasn't that many. And then the other question bank would be eMedica. This is not something I personally used, but my peers did. And what they found useful about it was it's the layout of the eMedical questions is exactly the same as it would be in the exam. So if that's something that you feel like you need as part of your revision to kind of prep yourself to see how the questions would be viewed, then eMedica could potentially be a route to go down. But something to be wary about with that and MCQ Bank is I think the level of difficulty and the content doesn't really reflect what's in the actual exam. It's more, maybe even more past medicine that's probably more relevant. And then in terms of choosing deaneries, so for me, I picked Southwest London as my first choice purely because it was close to home. And also I just wanted to go to somewhere which was a bigger trust, and it allowed me more opportunities. So I'm quite close by to another deanery, which is called Surrey and Borders. And I did work there for a while, but it's just outside London. And if I compare, for example, the core training programs in Southwest London, I'm getting the opportunity to work in a forensics ward as a core trainee, but in Surrey and Borders, that's not necessarily the case. So that's just something to think about when you're applying to particular deaneries. If you want to go to a bigger deanery or a smaller one, what opportunities are available to you? At the end of the day, though, I'm sure by the end of CT3, we all end up in the same position. We all end up taking the same exam. So it doesn't matter if you aren't able to have those same experiences. I think the other thing to be wary of is obviously if you do decide to apply to a bigger trust, then it will be a bit more busy. So yeah, that's just something to bear in mind. So I think you saw this slide, but yeah, what do I think of CT1 so far? I really enjoy it. There's lots of positives. So I'm currently on an inpatient psychiatric ward, which is a mixed adult ward. So any patients between the ages of 18 and 65, both male and female. It is hectic. It is very chaotic. I've heard that is probably the busiest job you're probably going to get as a core trainee, but you do see a lot, you learn a lot, and then you're on your feet quite a bit. I think actually one of the biggest surprises for me was actually more to do with the physical health side of things. Like there was a big expectation on you as the SHO to kind of manage a lot. Like one moment you are the medical registrar, the next minute you act as like the GP and dealing with the bog standard, rash. So that there is a lot of variability in that as well. as Rosemary said, yes, you get access to like ballot groups. There's lots of teaching, weekly supervisions with a consultant, which is really nice. The other thing I also wanted to mention was the on-calls. So the on-calls are doable. The rota is quite nice in the sense, for example, in my 6-month rotation, I've only got like 2 sets of weekday nights, which are quite spread out. The good thing about being in a bigger trust, especially when you are on a bigger site, is that you have like an on-call buddy. So you have someone with you when you want to go clerk, see patients together. But again, I think that's not something always reflected in the smaller deaneries. And what's nice about the on-calls is that you also switch sites quite a bit. So it gives you an opportunity to see what other wards are like, what other teams are like, and you can learn a lot from that. I think the most positive thing about being a core trainee is actually you almost feel like you're part of a club. The other core trainees, the CT2s and the CT3s, are really helpful. They're very approachable. Everyone's ready to give you some advice, and you just feel very well supported. And me and my cohort of CT1s, you know, are very close to each other. So I think, yeah, you just kind of know that you're being very well looked after. So I think that's the positive. I think that's it, really. So sorry, I thought I had more to say, but I think a lot, Rosemary and Amelia have covered a lot more. But thank you so much for listening. I've left my email address. So if, I know we have a Q&A now, but if anybody's got some questions that they want to ask me about core training or CT1, I'm more than happy to answer after the presentation today as well.
Divya, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for your talk. And it just, you know, I feel excited and sort of feel I want to go back and apply to CT1 all over again. That sense of the camaraderie and just the absolutely fascinating things that you do as a CT1, and that support and educational environment really comes across. So now we've got about 15 minutes for questions, and thank you to everybody who has been putting their questions in the chat box, and the team behind the scenes who have been answering them as we've gone through. You've met most of the panel. You've met Divya, you've met Rosemary and Amelia, but I'd now like to introduce Professor Nandini Chakraborty. Nandini is a consultant in early intervention psychiatry in Leicester, and she's the national lead for recruitment, which is a joint post between Health Education England and the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and she works very closely with Amelia and her team in Manchester. So the first question that we haven't answered so far, I think this is a really good one to put to our panel, is will ST1 in child and adolescent, so this is the run-through programme in child and adolescent psychiatry, in their rotation, will they have exposure to other disciplines like general adult, old age psychiatry, or is it just child and adolescent psychiatry? I think that's a really important question for us to answer. And I'm wondering, Nandini, if we could go to you first just to answer that one.
The first 3 years of the rotation are going to be similar to core training. So people even entering at ST1 for CAMS would have to do their core competencies and their placements through the other specialties to gain those core competencies and pass their MRC psych before they can progress to ST4 in CAMS. It means that your training number and your run-through placement is ensured, but you still have to do the other placements in the earlier on years.
Fantastic, Nandini, thank you. And I think, you know, my understanding is that, you know, one of the exciting things about the run-through programme is that you have access to a mentor in child and adolescent psychiatry throughout the entire training programme. So when you're, you know, first starting off and like Divya, you know, spending time on an acute adult ward, even at that time you have access to a mentor. And the other exciting thing about that programme program is that unlike core training, you have a placement in paediatrics as well, so quite often in community paediatrics for 6 months, and both of those aspects of the rotation are things that we get really good feedback on. I think the other thing to say is that we are hoping that we may be able to advertise a run-through program in intellectual disability for 2022. So watch this space. I think there are some final arrangements being made, and there will be details on the college website and via Health Education England Northwest. I don't know, Amelia, if you wanted to say anything about that at all, if there's anything to add about intellectual disabilities, or it's not finalised, I know, but we are very much hoping that that will be an option for candidates.
Yeah, so it's not finalised at the moment, but if you submit an application at this stage, you don't need to indicate that you're interested at all. Later on in the process, when we do the preferencing window, it will be available as a preference, so you would just pick it out then.
Fantastic, thank you. So that's a bit of reassurance that actually you don't need to rush to decide at the moment which of the programs you want to apply. There's plenty of time, and I think the key message is get your application in by the deadline in early December, and then you've got wiggle room after that to decide. So there's another question, I think, while we're on the subject of run through from one of the an anonymous participant, and saying, I noticed that only a few deaneries are planning on offering CAMS ST1. Is there any chance that further deaneries will add ST1 posts during this recruitment cycle before we get to the preferencing stage? Again, Amelia, that's probably one for you.
Yeah, so it's completely possible. So we'd recommend that you do submit the application, and then the preferencing window will open next year in February. So at that time, we will have the final vacancy numbers, and we'll be able to tell you where the run-through posts will be available.
That's lovely, thank you. Now, there's a really interesting question here about academic clinical fellow posts, ACF posts. And the question from Leith Alexander is, how does the MRSA fit into ACF posts? And if we get an ACF post, do we just need to pass the MSRA? So I think my understanding is there's a separate interview for ACFs, and maybe you just want to talk through, Amelia, how that works. But the question is about MSRA, and do they need to get a particular score, or is it just a pass?
It's just a pass. So you need to just be eligible for, you need to be clinically benchmarked for core psychiatry. And then, like you said, you would have to submit a separate ACF application, which is direct to the region. And so the two kind of work in tandem.
Brilliant, thanks, Amelia. And if we've got people on the call, because that's really important, academic training, we're keen to support people, encourage people to consider, becoming academic psychiatrists. We've got Nandini on the call. Nandini is research active consultant. So we're really keen that people consider academic routes. If people on the call were interested, where would they go for further information about how to apply for ACF posts? Well, Amelia, sorry.
It's okay. ACF posts are they're sort of advertised by region rather than specialty. So the best place to look would be the HE region websites, where they will have them listed. And those posts will also be available on Oriel, where you will submit your core psychiatry application as well.
Fantastic. And I don't know, are they on NIHR website as well? I don't know the answer to that question. We can find out.
So, yeah.
We can find out and add something to the information on our website about that. And I don't know, Nandini, if you wanted to say anything about academic training and in response to that.
I think it will depend on the ranking from MSRA. Obviously, there is the cutoff beyond which we would be giving offers, but then it fits in with the demand for the posts, and the offers would come according to the ranking So if somebody is interested in an ACF post, it depends on where their ranking is in order to be offered the post, is my understanding.
Okay. But we're just going for a path. They just need to be eligible for core training. Okay, that's really helpful. So another question here about references. So do they all have to be consultant supervisors, or can there be other senior multidisciplinary team members who've worked with you, like OTs or psychologists, etc.? And this person saying that they've worked as a psychiatry SHO for 2 years in a post under the same consultant, so they don't actually have 3 consultant referees for the past 2 years of their practice. Amelia, over to you.
Ideally, they would all be consultants, but obviously, given the situation that the person's explained, obviously that will be difficult. We'd recommend putting who you think is best in the application form. We don't ask for references until people have accepted the post. So further along in the process, after accepting a post, if the recruiting region don't quite agree that they're suitable referees, you'll have that conversation with the region to work out how to proceed.
Fantastic, thank you. And again, we've had another question about references. So how many references do we need, and how many years do they need to cover? As an FY2, do you need a reference from medical school, as we've only just been working for over a year?
No, ideally, they would cover the last 3 working years, but if you're an F2, that's fine. So you would just pick 3 consultants from your 2 years of clinical experience.
Fantastic, thank you. So you don't need to be digging back into medical school. Great. So this is an interesting question as well. So this is about international medical graduates. I currently have a little over 12 months NHS experience after full registration. In regards to the 24 months, I came from a 6-year medical school course, and my final year was as an internship. And I think that's quite common, isn't it, in many of the international medical school courses. Hence, I was granted full GMC registration when I came to the UK. Would that be sufficient for the application?
It would. You'd have to make it quite clear in the employment history that that internship year was a clinical post. But like you said, it's really common. We get a lot of applications from overseas candidates, so that's not an issue at all.
Fantastic. And then related to that, I think, is this question from Rashid Al-Hadi, which says, do we need to have the crest at the time of application between the 4th of November and to the closing date in December? Or is it like the foundation competencies that we actually have until August to secure it?
No, if you have to provide a crest as your evidence foundation competency, it has to be supplied at the time of application. There's no extensions.
That's great. So by, and what, just to get the date in December, the closing deadline for people is
Wednesday, the 1st of December.
Wednesday, the 1st of December. So you have up until then, but we encourage everybody to get their applications in earlier than that, if they possibly can. So again, another question related to people applying as international medical graduates. Do you need a valid IELTS or OET if you're currently working in the UK as a standalone foundation trainee?
No, if you have full GMC registration, you're kind of exempt from providing that evidence because the GMC would have tested that to grant you your full registration. But if you don't have GMC registration, that's when we would check your English language requirements, and they would have to be valid.
Brilliant. And then again, a question about the MSRA. So when should we book it? Well, I think you've answered that already, that people will receive an invitation for the MSRA, so you don't need to worry about putting in an application until you're invited to do so. Fantastic. So many questions. We've answered an awful lot of them. I'm going to go back just to the open questions here. And we've got a question here again, for people who want to apply, for next year or the year after next, that's February 2023. You may not have set the dates yet, Amelia, I don't know, but what would the application window opening be for February 2023? When do people need to start getting their applications in?
I'm not sure if that's been published yet, but I expect it would be August, mid-August next year for the February intake.
Yeah. And are we anticipating any changes to the application process?
Not for the February intake. It's the same recruitment year, so it'll be the same process.
Right, brilliant. Okay, so everything that you've heard today about applicate will be equally applicable in August when you're applying for February 2023. What if we don't have, so this is an important question, what if we don't have 12 months NHS experience? Can we still apply?
Yeah, there's no requirement to have NHS experience at all. If you're an overseas candidate, it won't affect your application negatively at all. You just need to have 24 months clinical experience. 12 months of that needs to be post-registration or GMC registration or equivalent.
Yeah, okay, that's absolutely great. So I think we're probably just at the end of the questions. We've answered a lot of them already, but I'm just going to go to the panel and pick up from Divya, Nandini and Rosemary. Any kind of key final comments? We're going to be finishing the webinar fairly shortly, so what would your sort of final advice be to people considering applying? So Divya first.
I would definitely say just go for it. It has been a really enjoyable experience, but I would say just make sure that it is right for you. So if you haven't got that experience prior in psychiatry, do try and locum in a job somewhere, get a trust grade job somewhere, and that would also be beneficial to sort of knowing this is the route for you.
Fantastic. And Rosemary, top piece of advice to applicants?
So again, I think go for it. Choosing psychiatry is the best decision ever made, but go for it early. So, the application period has now opened. Audio takes a bit longer than you expect. It's not a 2-minute application form, so get started quickly would be my advice.
Fab. And Nandini, as our lead for national recruitment, what's your advice to applicants?
The same. Leave plenty of time for your application. Don't leave it till the last minute. Prepare for your MSRA well. And just a small technicality, and I would actually want to check it with Amelia. Somebody has asked about the 12 months post-registration. Is it at the time of application or by the time you start CT1? I think it's by the time they start.
That's correct, yeah.
I just wanted to check I'd given the right answer. So thank you for that, Amelia. Yes, that's all from me.
That's fantastic. So you've heard it, I think, really clearly, advice from our panelists. Go for it. I think we've heard that ringing loud and clear. Really encourage you to apply for psychiatry. We've heard from Divya and from Rosemary about just how rewarding and exciting training is. So do please follow up your interest and make your application. But in doing so, encourage you to apply early, put plenty of time aside for your application and prepare well for the MSRA. And I think it just leaves me to wish you all the very best of luck with your application. Look forward to welcoming you to psychiatry and the college in the not too distant future, hopefully. And I know we've got some young members of the audience, so I know that I've got a message saying from a mum of a young person complaining that I didn't wave back when they waved at me on the screen. So I think we'll all wave now and wish you all luck. And Grace, this is for you. Bye everyone, take care.